Good morning, everybody, and welcome to yet another wonderful session that we've got lined up for you guys as part of the New Politics and Afrofuturism program, which is calling for Black radical imagination and pop culture as powerful vehicle for propelling progressive social justice narratives to mainstream audiences, with a focus on Afrofuturism, Black activism, art and culture, climate justice, along with political theory and practice. And for anybody that's not familiar with the University of the Underground, it is a free, pluralistic, and transnational university which is based in the basement of nightclubs in Amsterdam. But as you can see, due to the recent global events, the program is all online. So the title of this wonderful lecture that we've got planned for you guys is called Rewriting the Problematic Counter-Narratives. And we really have been spoiled that we've got a wonderful educator, lecturer, whatever you want to call it, and her name is Catherine Sarah Young. Just to give you a bit of information about Catherine. Catherine Sarah Young is a Chinese-Filipina and award-winning interdisciplinary artist, designer, and writer who creates works that investigate nature, our role in nature, and the tensions between nature and technology. She's trained in molecular biology, contemporary art, and interaction design. She has many artistic bodies of work which really investigate climate change and our environmental futures, entitled the Apocalypse Projects, and Science and Society, and Future and RX. She has an international exhibitions, awards, and fellowship profiles, and works with scientists, industry, and communities, most recently in Berlin, Vienna, Beijing, and the Amazon rainforest. And she also currently writes science fiction, which is amazing, and has been practicing Taekwondo for more than 20 years. She's also currently a Scientia PhD scholar at UNSW Art and Design, working on climate change and sustainability, and an Obama leader for the Asia Pacific. And Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. You are most welcome, and we're really looking forward to it. I'll hand the floor over to you.
Cool. Can everyone hear me, see me okay? All right. Okay, cool. Hi, guys. So my name is Catherine. You guys can call me Kat. Um, first I have to do what people here do, and it is to acknowledge country, which is I'm coming at you from Sydney, Australia, which is originally Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. It is 9 p.m. here. As I told you, it is not the worst thing that has happened to me, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. Some housekeeping. I am told I should speak slowly. I know we come from so many different places in the world. I lived in New York City for 5 years, and they thought I was speaking so fast. So if you think I am speaking so fast, just like put in the chat like slow down. And also use the chat for any comments, questions, and I will address them after the talk. So um, I we have an agenda, so I speak for 40 minutes, which I think is quite a very long time to listen to a person speak. How many of you have Zoom fatigue? Um, I This is not a very ideal situation for a class, but at the same time, I'm really happy that we have the opportunity to get together from different corners of the world, which was not possible before, but now we can. And because I'm speaking for 40 minutes, I've divided this into three parts so that you guys are clear as to what you're getting from the hour. So part one, I will look at brief snapshots of environmental art. And then second part would be my art practice. And a third part would be strategies that I can share with you guys. So if you decide to use these as tools for your own practice. And then a 20-minute Q&A, and then half an hour. Wow, it suddenly got very dark. Hang on, guys. There we go. Okay, cool. Um, For 30 minutes, we're going to do an introduction to the workshop, Rewriting the Problematic, Counternarratives 1. And you guys get me for another week. So, okay, cool. So in terms of environmental art, a lot of my practice has been labeled as green art, eco art. I don't necessarily agree with this, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to give a very quick and dirty rundown of some of the highlights of environmental art. So environmental art primarily celebrates the artist's connection with nature using natural materials. And maybe we can argue that cave paintings were the first environmental art. And for the longest time, do you remember the paintings at Lascaux in France, the Chauvet caves? That was thought to be the oldest. But then more recently, we have other discoveries that where experts challenge that view with paintings found in Sulawesi. And shown here is the earliest known hunting scene in prehistoric art. And I think it's very interesting to reflect on how the discovery of these have rewritten the origin of art from the north to the south, and what we think of as the origins of civilization or the origins of art and creative thinking, which I think is very important in reflecting on, especially in the context of the great big post-colonial reckoning that we have going on today. Other examples of very early land interventions are these geoglyphs that we know of as Nazca lines, made in the soil of the Nazca Desert in Peru, by people creating these incisions in the desert floor to expose another layer of soil with a different color. And the recent one being this very cute one of a cat, which I thought was really awesome. I think it's worth noting the size of these drawings, considering the very limited technology of the time. And as I'm in Australia, we can't forget the rock art made by the Aboriginal people of Australia, which is the oldest continuous living culture in the world. And I think this is a very exciting field in archaeology because they're always finding new things, such as the one on the right, where it's a very previously undescribed style of Aboriginal art. So we're going to fast forward centuries later to the environmental art that we know. And I mentioned this famous one, Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson, not just because it's beautiful, but also because of the harm that it caused to the ecosystem when he did this spiral. And I think it's something to think about when we are all making our own artworks. I personally do art to address certain issues and hopefully to propose specific solutions, and you have to think about what's the harm that your intervention might cause. Some of you who are in the UK will probably will probably have seen this. So Andy Goldsworthy is a famous one, and I think what I like about him is that he makes sure at least that the land is not harmed when he's making his environmental interventions. And Joseph Boyes, his urban reforestation project, 7,000 Oaks, began in 1982 and presented at Documenta 7 and continued until his death in 1986. So each tree was accompanied by a basalt stone, shown here on the left. And this tree planting drive was, in the artist's mind, supposed to regenerate the life of humankind within the body of society and to prepare for a positive future in that context. What I like about this piece is that it almost got the artist to do what the government should be doing, right? And this is something I think is good about art, because anything is kind of valid as art. We're free to do the things that we want. And if we do have that power, we might as well do it for positive things and do the things that a society lacks. American-Canadian artist Betty Beaumont worked with a team of scientists in 1978 to transform processed coal waste from a hydroelectric power plant in Ohio into these inert rectangular blocks. And over time, the blocks have been transformed into a lush reef, a rich ecosystem teeming with fish, and it was a very successful project. And what I like about this project is that it turned something that could potentially be very wasteful and a pollutant into something that was actually beneficial for the ecosystem. We can't talk about environmental art without talking about the great Agnes Dean. So in Wheatfield, A Confrontation, 1982, the artist planted wheat on 2 acres of uninhabited land valued at 4.5 billion near New York's Wall Street. So you could see the World Trade Center pre 9/11 in the background, which is really interesting. And then she harvested the wheat. So during the 60s and 70s in the West, especially with cultural milestones such as the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962, so there was a lot of activism in the West. And this is like an image that taken from the first Earth Day in the 70s. And what I like about this image is that it's a guy in a mask, and now we are all wearing masks. And I think this is like very, well, like, this is very prescient of what environmental artists are doing. It's like they kind of predict the effects of the harm that's being caused to the environment. And so we segue to my art practice. So I did not grow up in the West. I grew up in Manila in the Philippines, and I've lived in 9 other countries prior to finally coming to Australia for a PhD. And I felt pretty lucky to have slid in the country right before lockdown. And to me, what I learned later on as environmental art was raising awareness on how the environment was being destroyed, as opposed to the environmental art, or at least the relationship of indigenous and aboriginal people, which was more about celebrating their relationship with nature. So I see my work, which some people may say as environmental, more of a systemic way to repair what has been done to the planet. So as Majid said, my background is in molecular biology, fine art, and interaction design, which is a terrible combination if you have Asian parents, people. Um, so in the beginning, I was like very confused on what is art, what's science, what's design, looking at all of these intersections until finally now, I don't really see the distinction so much. I just use all of these fields as a set of tools in my arsenal of creativity that I use to attack environmental and social issues. And so my most known, during my earlier years, this was a piece I did in SBA. So this is called an olfactory memoir of 3 cities. I was doing a lot of these art science pieces. So this is a book of scents. Um, the page on the right shows a printed scent, kind of like the scratch and sniff that we all had when we were kids. And on the left is a memory, my memory of the scent. But if I pass that book to you guys, you will all have a different memory of this scent. In this case, it's the scent of burnt rubber. And so I really enjoy this idea of sharing different, like, my memories with people, and knowing that you guys have very diverse memories as well. So something like olfaction can be a very inclusive way to get people who think very different things to discuss something. After my MA, I did this probably like 7 or 8 straight years of art residencies around the world. And the first one was at the National Art Studio of Korea. And I don't know if you've been to Seoul, but it's a very, very mountainous city. In fact, the entire country is like 75% mountain. And what I did was I hiked all the 43 mountains of Seoul and lived to tell the tale. So I would hike a mountain, and at the bottom of the mountain, I would borrow a jar of soil until after 2 months of nonstop hiking and nearly dying, I had 43 jars of soil. And then I really enjoyed hiking all of these places. And then what I did was got participants to plant with the soil, to bring back the soil and plant them back in the mountains. What I like about this experience is that I took an experience I enjoyed, but instead of painting it or doing something very static, I ended up sharing the experience with other people. And kids were telling me they've never climbed the mountain before, and not for me, then they did. My most known body of work is the Apocalypse Project. And I began this as the artist in residence at the Singapore ETH Future Cities Lab in 2013. The goal of the series is to imagine our environmental futures primarily through climate change using interactive art science projects. And the first project was this one called Climate Change Couture, which I co-designed with some of the researchers in the lab to explore what we would wear under climate change, especially during specific scenarios, such as superstorms and extreme heat. So gas masks, being in a bubble, those things are, um, in a way, manifestations of the apocalypse we are having now. But before, it was mostly hints of what was to come. So I did this in response to Super Typhoon Haiyan impacting southern Philippines, which happened around the time of the residency. It was very interesting to see the reactions of people. So there was a lot of media attention on this project, as well as from people who saw the exhibition at the Marine Art Science Museum. And it was both positive and negative, which illustrates the inequalities of climate change around the world, and also the potential for inclusive discussion through the arts. And also, although in this case, I am the artist as well as the collaborators, I open this and other projects to audiences through workshops about my work. And so for me, all of us are artists. So I think that's a good thing about being in sciences, coming from the sciences and design, other different fields, that I don't really think it's all precious. I feel like the power of the arts is that we can open it to everyone for healing and transformation. So I pushed on with several other projects through various art residencies and fellowships. So from Singapore in 2013, I did something in Manila, then Palo Alto, Medellin, Uganda, and the Amazon. And the second project I want to talk to you about is the Ephemeral Marvels perfume store, a perfume line of things we could lose because of climate change. And so the scents are those of things that we know in nature and that are disappearing, such as the scents of coffee, coast, peanuts, ice, trees, wine, etc. And because olfaction is closely related to memory, the intention of the work is for you to remember your memories of these scents to inspire you to conserve them. And also, because our memories of the same scent are very diverse, the project embraces our differences. And again, similar to the book of scents I did before, it provides an inclusive space to discuss them. So there is no incorrect interpretation. And I think the power of olfaction is because it's a very, very intimate sense and also very abstract and yet specific. And we don't have a very good way of like talking about scent. It's very, the project is part art, science, and design. And so I was able to exhibit this in multiple venues around the world, also making different editions and also making different volumes of the piece. So for example, each city or each ecosystem has its a specific set of scents. And for you, if you guys have ever been transplants like me, you know, or if you travel a lot, you know, each city, each place has its own set of smells. One thing about this pandemic is that we can't smell anything. Our sense of sight and sound are still very saturated. I can't smell anything that you guys are emitting, you know. So sometimes I've had to do these pandemic contingencies or Zoom contingencies. So I made a sci-fi version or a fictional version of the perfume project in a book, and in a way, you can't smell it, but you could read the story of the scents, and that's the one thing I can actually transmit digitally to you guys. The third project is a sewer soapery, where I turn raw sewage into soaps. I know this is seriously the grossest thing I've ever done in my life. I use it to raise awareness on improper waste practices in fatbergs that are clogging up the sewers, which will worsen conditions in cities, especially as storms become stronger. And I will talk about a little bit more about the process for this. But the project has evoked various emotions from people, from joy to disgust, especially if you exhibit in places where they allow for interactivity. So when people were asked to wash with a soap or invited to wash with a soap, some were hesitating, some were like, yeah, let's do it. Um, and I think the power of the arts is that it can show a range of feelings towards a certain issue so that we may act on them. So another project is Future Feast, where I collaborate with chefs to design dishes of the future as we struggle to feed a growing population amidst climate change effects. So there are things that are in the realm of possibility today, such as dishes using insects. Here we go, the second row, and also earthworm cultures, like hamburger patty made out of earthworm meat. Um, but there are also other things that are absurd today, but perhaps possible in the future, such as resurrecting extinct species as a protein source. So there are these are like fictions that I created. In a way, you can sort of frame them as rewriting problematic products because a lot of them are luxury products that have their own share of issues. But as you will see later, I also open this up to other people creating their own works. And I think this is the power of doing interactive art that's pretty diverse and wide ranging. So, for example, these are a series of workshops with Plan International when I was their artist in residence in 2016. They got me to do these art workshops with children and youth from climate change impacted communities in Southeast Asia. So this is in Chiang Mai, Leba, and Tacloban. Initially, Tacloban is the same um, place that was hit by Super Typhoon Haiyan. So it was very uplifting to see kids who actually experienced um, Super Typhoon Haiyan and see them make something. So in this case, I asked them to make sculptures of places in their communities that are impacted by climate change or that need climate change adaptation. Um, and I also asked them to take photographs in their community. So what are the places in your community that need climate change adaptation? One thing I do like about working with NGOs is that it helps, or at least I think we as artists need to be responsible in terms of engaging the public. So this is why I like to going through organizations that know how to work with kids. I don't just like grab a kid and ask them to draw something. I think it's quite exploitative. But in these like very facilitated residency format, I think it's worth doing. It's some of the most rewarding things I've done in my career. So what did I do with these? It was more of a collaboration between me and the children and the youth. So with our sculptures, I made these globes called storm globes. Kind of like snow globes, but instead of snow, they get like all the stuff that you get when you are experiencing a hurricane. And for the photographs, I turned them into these Viewmaster reels, which I'm sure we've all played with them, or most of us have, and they're very fun. And we exhibited them in the 11th International Conference on Community-Based Adaptation, which has a lot of professionals and politicians in the climate change field. And I think it's really powerful to get these people who claim to be working for these kids to actually look at climate change through the eyes of the people they claim to help. Right? Imagine actually having the voice of these kids in these conferences. I think that would be very helpful in terms of transforming society. So I've been in the space for a very long time, and I was I've been very observant as to how these conversations have evolved. Um, they don't evolve like linearly, but for the sake of simplifying discussion, it really transformed over time. So back in 2013, when I started my climate change work, the problem was like, what's climate change? What's climate versus weather, right? And then moving on, there was like climate change denial. Now we know what scientists have been branding it as the Anthropocene. What is the Anthropocene? And then we were looking at differences in the effects of climate change around the world. And then we moved on to the different factors causing climate change, like inequality, wealth distribution, systems change that we need, science and economic policies, accepting differences between us, our post-truth era, filter bubbles, all of those things. And then before, and then eventually, now we are here. COVID-19 and the great big post-colonial reckoning. So I started a new body of work called Wild Science. Essentially, it was about interrogating the role of science in society. And one of the pieces I'll discuss here is called Experiments in Nature. Essentially, I am performing, like I'm literally performing experiments in nature. So showing an experiment, in this case, a very simple distillation experiment you guys have all done in high school, which is controlled as experiments are, being performed in nature, which is wild and uncontrolled, and in this case, the Amazon rainforest. So I wanted to ask specific questions such as who was doing the experiment, considering that is its nature providing the environmental conditions instead of me. Is it a successful or a futile experiment? I did manage to make the experiment work, but are the results even valid? Are these performative experiments in the same way that science, with its failure to affect policy, especially in the US, seems to sometimes be a performative discipline? And science kind of becomes a theatrical space where people question the legitimacy of, for instance, climate data. And for me, these are all very difficult questions. But I think art that can ask these provocative questions in a way that captures attention and encourages people to participate is better than us not talking to each other at all. So another piece in the series is called Letters for Science. So it's a participatory project that asks the public to write letters to science denialists. The idea is to explain the science to people who, for example, do not believe in climate facts and to ask them to stand on the side of science. And I do this because I think that a better informed public helps society in general, especially when it comes to policy making. And this is an example of a 14-year-old kid, a letter from a 14-year-old kid from Austria writing to a climate change denier. Let us read it. All right, dear denier of the climate change, I know you won't listen to a piece of paper. It would be like a broken pencil, pointless. Anyhow, else we'll try and why not? You may think that nothing is happening. Nah, here is a comic about your hocus pocus climate change. It won't convince you, but if it does, great. I love kids. If you're convinced, don't read the text down here. So we have a penguin. Before climate change, I wish it would be warmer. If we don't change anything, not that warm. Help. If we change something, better. See, I told you. I know it won't convince you. Buddy, look, the polar caps are melting. It is getting warmer, and a small group of politicians denying it too. Our entire species is in danger like polar bears. And for people like me that like snow and winter will be sad because real winters will become rare. Think of a world without winters, snow, and penguins. A world in that we did nothing and all the penguins are gone. Look at that sad penguin. So, friend, you really want a future with a bad time. So please do something. And if you still don't believe in that, then believe this. We can stop it. I would be thankful, but you decide after all. Heh. Now you know what I mean. Happy to help. I hope you too. Best thoughts, piece of paper, Christoph. So what I love about this is that it really gets people to empower them at least for that time that they wrote the letter, that they're at least talking to another person. And I think it's something important is to prevent apathy. So at least do something, anything, right? It's also very good to sort of engage kids as early as possible because they're the ones who are going to have bear the brunt of climate change impacts. And this is something I really treasure as an artist who's had a very, very big international footprint from residencies and fellowships, and with the leadership programs I'm doing, such as this one with the Meccan Cultural Hub in British Council. I think it's really nice to be able to reach people that you don't normally reach. So this was a future resilient communities workshop with some elderly people from Kampong Thom and rural Cambodia. So basically, I was asking them to design their future resilient community because I think in this particular village, I think they were experiencing a lot of drought and potential wars or shortage. And it's really interesting for me to be able to do something like this, and also very humbling because they're elderly people with a lot of wisdom and experience. So this is a current project I'm doing called The Weighing of the Heart. Um, I am casting the ashes from the Australian bushfires into human hearts. The title is in reference to the scene of the weighing of the heart, a spell in the Egyptian Book of the Dead in which the heart of Imhotep is weighed against a feather. If the heart fails to balance, it will be eaten by the beast, Amut, and Imhotep will be condemned. If the scales remain balanced, Imhotep enters the afterlife with the other blessed dead. So in casting the ashes with resin, I arrest metabolism of the remains back into the soil, creating objects of memory in a political landscape that forgets the bushfire crisis periodically, only to remember them when the next bushfire crisis commences with greater intensity, which is coming up soon, and I am very scared because there is a travel ban. I cannot leave. So in parallel to this, I am creating ink out of the ashes of the bushfires, and I am printing some of the text from people who disagree with climate facts and address them to me in the form of tweets and articles. So, as you can imagine, doing something like this kind of like really triggers some people. So I've, occasionally will get something like, warmest thinks trace carbon dioxide will result in you eating a steak made out of worms. Hashtag climate, hashtag hysteria. Or this one, like Arctic, stable for the past half decade. Antarctic, not melting at all. Okay. So we'll also invite people to write with the ink in a future exhibition. So for the last part, strategies for the creative resistance, since I think you guys are part of the creative resistance, and the rest of the University of the Underground. I want to talk to you about the process of me doing this in case it might be useful to you. So to rewrite the problematic, we need to define the system or systems in which the problem sits. So taking you through the sewer soapery again, this is actually a set of soaps made from the oil from different points of the cycle of how palm oil is consumed. So we all know about super typhoons, and in megacities, this one is in Manila. When it rains for like 5 minutes, everything the sewer systems just get clogged, and part of this is because of how much fatty wastes are deposited in the sewers, and this is the case for a lot of megacities, London, India, and a lot of other places. And I was actually stuck in a flood one time, which is why I was like very annoyed and vowed I would do a project out of this. And I highly encourage you guys, anything that sort of like really rails you, that's the project you need to do, because that will be the thing that sustains you and give you a very personal story to talk about. So let's talk about palm oil. So palm oil is one of the probably the most commonly used oil in the world, harvested in Africa and Southeast Asia. It has so many uses. It's very difficult to live a very palm oil free existence because it permeates everything, from our shampoos to our food, literally everything. Think of like a world without any of the common things that we have, even like snacks, supplements, cooking, pastry fats, and a lot of other things. So, knowing that this kind of ended in the sewers, I would harvest the sewage, and I had the privilege of actually studying how these work when I was doing research in Medellin, Colombia, for a residency. And I was very lucky that they actually opened up the sewers for me. And Medellin is actually a city that doesn't flood. And I think it's because they keep their sewers pretty spiffy. And I was also looking at the alternative sewers that people were using. Like on the right, you see me kind of dressed as a Teletubby, and then harvesting some of the lipid wastes that are floating above the Medellin River, which is very polluted. So I was studying these, and then soap is the salt of a fatty acid. So if you combine, for any of you who are soap makers, you combine a type of oil with a specific amount of either potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide that's specific to the molecular weight of the oil that you are using. And it will saponify or turn into soap. So because the soap I was getting, the oil I was getting was not very consistent, because they're not like filtered when they're down there. I would get a lot of very funny looking phenotypes. So I arranged them. So I made soap out of like just the palm oil, the used palm oil, and the one on the right would be just like sewer grease. So this is from the open sewers, and also, the gunk you get in your sinks, right? Yeah, I took that. It was disgusting. Well, what can I do? That's the art. Um, and in the beginning, I just pitched this to art galleries. So this is in the Manila Biennial, and also a bunch of other venues that looked at this as art. Eventually, I would this project would be looked at as a design project, meaning an actual solution to a problem, because we're having a lot of these flooding in different cities. So it was actually looked at as a potential solution, and people were asking, do you want this as a potential solution to your to the fabrics that we have, to all of these waste. So I think that's the power of the arts, to be able to kind of foresee or involuntarily foresee that something you made as art can be a potential design solution. And this also happened with the masks that I was designing. Like when I was in Beijing, I literally took the mask off of my show and wore it in Beijing, just because there was no other mask that would withstand the smog that I was facing there. So again, when you do something like this, there are people who get it. That's great. Um, but there are also people who don't like it. You might remember the line here, Arctic stable for past half decade, that I wrote using the bushfire ash ink that I made. But I think it's good to be able to get a reaction, because I think it kind of, to me, it's like a taking the temperature of the room. Like, okay, there are people who, yeah, get it, and there are people who, wow, are calling me like nasty and whatever. Um, so I think this is how I look at art. I look at the world in terms of systems. And this is an example of a first order system. And we're not going to go second or third order because it's almost 10 p.m. here, guys. But what is useful here is to look at art as potential ways to attack. This is why I think about like my training in martial arts, which is all about knowing when to attack and when to step back. And as creative people, all of you probably are bleeding with a lot of ideas right now. Which idea will you greenlight? And maybe this is a tool that will help you figure out which one to do, and which one to choose, as opposed to the 100 other ideas you probably have. So I'm looking at the sewer systems as a closed system. So we have a regulator in the middle. This is the wastewater treatment plant facilities, and it's sensing all the sediments, the sludge that gets in, and it's outputting all of these different ways to process your waste, which affects the quality of the effluent, and so on and so forth. So the idea of the system is that it's always working, right? But there are disturbances in the system. So you have oils that can affect this, and if you overload the system, then the system stops. So for me, the sewer soapery is a way to stop the influx of these oils so that the system works better. And you can look at this in this way of thinking in all of the other types of art. Think of like a system where you want a just society, and always racism is a disturbance to having a society that's free and just and peaceful for everyone. And if you create a piece of work, hopefully it will stop all, a part of these racist attacks, then maybe the world will be better for everyone. So I'm also looking at norms when it comes to my practice. So you have the real world versus the art world. Maybe we have current norms, and by norms I mean patterns of behavior such that individuals prefer to conform to them. And the art has alternative norms, and we can pause it, and maybe the intersection of which we can find some middle ground, where people, think that the fictions that I made are potential solutions in real life. And for me, I believe in the power of the arts because it can. I'm hoping that it can change mindsets and behaviors. So you have all of these like thoughts before, like I don't believe in climate change, and hopefully people will say I want to know more, or it's hopeless, but hope's not dead, or it's up to someone else, but hey, it's up to me, or it's too complicated, but maybe I can try to understand at least this part, or it's always been done this way. Maybe I can try other things. It's boring. This part's kind of fun. I don't care. Okay, I care a bit because I did this. Or these people are so different from me, and we're not that different after all. So the last thought I want to give you before Q&A is that I think all of us are artists, and that we should beware of artists because they mix with all classes of society and are therefore the most dangerous. So let's go out there and be a menace to society. Thank you. Q&A now, guys.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for that, Catherine. Really appreciate it. And if it's cool, I'm just gonna take you off and sharing your screen. So, guys, and feel free to first of all, I've got a couple of questions. Has anyone got any questions you'd like to ask? I'll start off. So here's a quick question, Catherine. I'm curious in terms of what would you find more effective, I guess, when it comes to doing artwork regarding climate. Do you reckon is having a more of a hopeful piece of project, like trying to show what the world can be like in a positive, like talking about like a positive future? Because a lot of times the kind of rhetoric around climate activism can be a bit like doom and gloom and like apocalyptic at times. And you find there still is a place for that, or like you think there needs to be a balance of like being really hopeful, trying to paint a picture of what can be in the future? Or you reckon it's also really important to kind of say, listen, this is serious, it can be a doom and gloom, we need to do something about it now?
I believe in a balance, and I also believe in putting out things that are kind of the antithesis to what's happening in the world right now. I think I started apocalypses before because we didn't have it as much before. But now, I think the idea is to be a little bit more hopeful and maybe do like, I think solar punk is a big, not trend, but a big like movement right now. I had a short story that one recently, and it was like a hopeful, non-apocalyptic story. I think the reason why I think it's important to be able to imagine both extremes is like, I tell people, okay, think of like the last breakup that you guys had. You didn't know how bad it would get, right? And then it got really bad, and you're like, oh my god. So the next time you had a relationship, then you know what to do. And I think this is why when I bring in like for example martial arts training, it's all about training. We need to train to be resilient. We need to know how bad it get so that we can prevent this from happening. The idea, of course, is to as an artist, I'm I have like polar bear fatigue, dying of polar bear fatigue. I'm sure everyone else has like doom and gloom. So what are when you're making something, what are the things you can make? You could do a double take. And I think this is pretty important in terms of, especially in a world where we're so saturated with everything. Like I don't know if there's anything new sometimes people can give. So I think always think about like your audience. I always like thinking my primary audience, even though my audience is everyone. Yes, even the people who hate my work. But I would say my primary audience would be kids. Because yeah, because again, they're the ones who are going to bear the brunt of climate change. They're the ones who are going to need to really adapt to the situation.
I think one of the things I really admired about your work was because climate, like in terms of climate activism or just climate crisis, it can be so far removed from ordinary people's lives, even though they're the most people who are affected by it the most. So even stuff like creating the soap with the kind of sewage thing, I thought was really, really ingenious way of doing it, because you get some kind of, you get the kind of climate activism and artwork. Like for example, you'll have the big ice and ice kind of like, I don't know which artist it was who got big kind of ice and big ice cubes, not an actual ice cube, but parts of the glaciers that were broken up, and they shipped it to and outside. And yeah, so there could be like grand pieces of artwork, of course, which look absolutely stunning, but may kind of not be so good in terms of reaching those kind of communities who are affected by it and the most. So what tips are like, how do you say, what, like, is it easy? Is it difficult to kind of like create artwork that can be minimal, but still really, really effective at the same time?
So I like the works that I've been doing because there were smaller pieces done for like specific finite residencies. So it's not like I had time to make the big ones. I was like, I'd focus on the small ones that are very thoughtful. I think those are the ones that are very insidious. Like they really are. I mean, climate change is a slow burn, but also the works themselves, the effects are kind of like very slow. And I also think that that's why it gets those reactions from people who don't believe in climate facts. They're looking at, and everyone's curious, right? And I really love latching on to the basic human curiosity of people. And then when they read the art statement, what it's about, then it's like, wow, I just spent like 10 minutes on a piece that I'm supposed to be reading. And I think it's also one way of getting everyone in the group together, just because I feel like, I mean, how many in a family, I'm sure there are people who are, have opinions that they're different from yours. And I think this is also very and I'm not just talking about, climate, it's also like politics in general.
Definitely.
I think, it's very difficult, especially when, people within the family are fighting because of different beliefs. And I think doing this, if you look at this from the perspective of a child, then I think you can get more people in the room together. And I'm not very confrontational, despite the taekwondo, I promise. I think it'll be good for everyone. Um, and I think this is one way to have something that latches on the beauty of the human mind, of human curiosity. And I know there's space for lots of artists who are more like in your face, but really, like, personally, I'm not really like that. So, and I think this is also a good way, especially for you people who are introverts like me. I would like something very small to scream very loud instead of me, like really.
No, no, brilliant. And Iris, do you want to ask a question?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. That was so inspiring. And I was wondering if you had any tips, or if you could tell us maybe more on how do you narrow down to these very specific projects from such complex. I mean, I think that you have this field of that you've been researching in so many ways for such a long time. And I was wondering, how do you get to these like very particular like projects from this, passionating and complex field? Thank you.
All of the projects that I do have some sort of personal connection to me. Like the sewer soaps, I was really, that pedicab that you saw, I was stuck in one, man. And I was like, I'm gonna make a project because this is so infuriating. I would suggest putting all of your ideas down on paper, literally all of them, like post-its, and then putting them all on the wall just to see what your mind regurgitated, like vomit it all out, and then figure out like what are the connections that you have. What are the things that scream the most to you? Maybe you can group some things together. It's like, oh, they're actually all kind of like similar, and the others. And then also look at more practical things like resources. How much time do you have? Maybe only have time for the smaller ones, and then progress to the big ones later. So I think now, for example, that's what I'm doing because I'm doing a PhD, so I have more time. Imagine like living in like 9 other countries before this, and it's, living out of a suitcase. There are limits to how big your thing can get. So also those, and also your audience. Some works will work better for certain cultures than others, so you also have to look at that. And also, I talk to a lot of people just to like see their thoughts on things. And I think in a way, there are artists who can lock themselves up in a room and do their work. I'm the type who will prototype things and ask people, what do you think? And I think you can get a lot of data that way. And I think that's also a very scientific way to look at things. So.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Dee?
Yeah, thanks again for this really amazing presentation. Could you please elaborate on how you research, select, or collaborate with institutions? Like what goes into your decision-making when choosing an institution or event like the Manila Biennale?
So some of them are things I've been invited to. Some things I applied to in an open call. I really cast a very wide net, and sometimes I'm not very comfortable with it with being an environmental artist of that label. But maybe I like looking at it as maybe being a planetary artist, where I have all these ideas. Which idea is a good fit for which place? And I think in terms of the institutions, usually they have an open call for that. And for anyone who's really into the artist in residency life, which is very fun, promise. I am probably the person to talk to, since I think I've done like over 20 residencies and fellowships. The most rewarding experience ever, because I think it's really very um, inspiring to talk to so many people of different places, and also to always have your assumptions challenged. Because like, oh, I thought I knew, but no. And the more you know, and the more you realize you don't know, the more you want to know. So I feel like I am on this never-ending treadmill of like making art for the rest of my life. So
Just another question from me. Oh, no. Chloe, go for it.
Okay. That was really interesting, and I think it's really neat how just like you said, you know, working with kids and like NGOs and on all these residencies also kind of gives you like a cool framework that amplifies your work, and that I feel like must be hard to do, like when you're on your own, you just have this small idea and you're at home and you're doing it in your corner. So I'm kind of curious though, like if you have any tips on how to get an artist residency, because I have a lot of, like, I myself and a lot of, you know, young people who try to apply with these like wild ideas often really easily get kind of ousted from the list, you know.
ah, so I apply to as many as 5 things a month, even now. And the reason is I would like to be so used to failure that I am not afraid of it. Yeah. And sometimes there are things that I would apply to, even though I know I'm not going to get it. But it's like, and then afterwards, you know what? I'm going to troll you and apply next year again. And sorry, I'm in the lab and it has a automatic thing where I have to.
You know what? I was going to say, was that like, that's some sort of quick change?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. When nothing moves, so I'm in the UNSW Design Futures Lab, and yes, this has been like my little lab for the past 2 months. So yeah, I apply shamelessly because I think the good thing about applying to these art residencies, it gets you to practice talking about yourself in your work. And I think being able to articulate what you are and what you stand for is something that everyone needs to be trained in, whether you're an artist, a politician, everything. Because all you know, if you're pro something, this is what you're about. There's so many things and factors that will challenge you. And I think you have to sort of like be able to take it, you know. And sometimes I think it's also what I look at when it comes to like my training in martial arts. You have to learn how to take hits, right? Regardless of what happens. And so I think when you're applying to things, girl, just keep applying. Like really troll them. If they reject you, I'm like, you know what? I'll apply next year and I will get this. And so get your document. It also allows you to gives you time to get your documents together. And I look at every single application kind of like an audition. And if I don't get it, okay, I analyze why didn't I get it and make it better for and again, even now, after doing over 20 residencies and fellowships, I am still applying 5 to 5 things a month just because I do like talking to people like you. And I do wish this kind of experience to everyone. And the good thing about being in this pandemic is that, well, there's no good thing in a pandemic, but I do appreciate the online residencies are now available to everyone. And I was thinking too, because you know, be doing all these residencies, you have to not have a family and be that intrepid traveler What about the moms with like 3 kids, or people who can't afford to travel? I am very happy that they now have opportunities to be able to interact with all of these amazing people, because we also need all of those perspectives. Um, so I think even though a lot of the opportunities I did before, maybe some of them are on hold because we can't travel, there are also other opportunities online that are happening. And that's something, if you guys want to talk to me about, again, I am very happy to share everything with you, because this is not as difficult as you think it is.
Just
Um,
no, just a question from me, just more of an interest. At what point did you call yourself an artist? In terms of like, when was it? Was it like after you created your first piece of artwork, or like, or was it like after you had like 6 pieces, you did 6 projects? So at what point were you confident enough to say, you know what, like I'm gonna call myself an artist?
That's a very strong word, right? Artist. It's like, okay, I always say that everyone is an artist in a way that I think might piss off some of the artists who see this word as very precious, because I don't think it's very precious. I think that's also a problem with the commercialization of art. It becomes so separate from what I think it can attack in society and solve in society, because we put so much like preciousness on the art. I think I started calling myself an artist. I think to when I applied to like grad school, you really just have to call yourself an artist. Just like call yourself an artist.
Yeah.
Like
I guess
all of the on me, like with my bio or something. Sometimes I have to write that, but not and just like cringe a little bit. But that's like the Kool-Aid that you put in the bio. Um, and those are like tags I think that people look at to see whether you're in their field. However, I don't the value that I put in my work and on my relationships, not on a label. If you have, just call yourselves artists. Everyone's an artist. Go guys.
yeah. Has anyone got any other final questions at all, guys?
I have a question, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Hi, Catherine. I'm Inven. Sorry, I'm not on video today.
Please.
It's a question really about sort of your approach when working with institutions, and sort of where I know you spoke about balance earlier, but just sort of to get a little bit of a framework of how far you challenge or push, sort of institutions with your work and ideas, especially when it's something you're passionate about. When you get to that stage of like, this actually might be challenging for them, sort of like, how do you sort of get to the idea of, well, I'm going to do it anyway, or actually I'm going to try and do it like this because it will be received better, or no, they just need to hear it. I hope that's clear.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I think especially when you're working like in a lab and you're like the artist in residence in a big lab, and sometimes scientists, they don't really look at artists and think that we're worth listening to. I would say not to care so much about what they think, and just like, I believe in showing up every day to work, whether people care about it or not. And over time, think of like, if you have a 2-month residency, for example, show up every day, keep making something, keep testing it, and most importantly, keep exhibiting to the public. Because I think in terms of institutions, their fear is that the public is not listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
The power of the arts, because whether they like it or not, the sewer soaps are there. um, and there are times too when I'm like, I'm not so. I don't enjoy getting gunk out of sewers and turning them into soap. Okay, I just think that they're effective, so I do it. I did get a tetanus shot before doing all of this. So I think when it comes to looking at institutions, I would say, as long as you can speak about your work in a way that you're confident as to what its impact might be and its potential, that's another skill that I would advise anyone to have, is to be able to speak confidently, even to people who might not agree with you. And again, happy to talk about this further. I can understand sometimes, especially when you have like so many institutions on your back. Yeah, totally. So
Thank you. That's great.
Anyone got any other final questions? And on that note, just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you so much, Catherine. It's really been amazing to kind of share everything that you have, and all the work that you're doing as well is truly amazing. So thanks for taking the time out as late as it is in Australia. So once again, thank you very much.
No worries. Are we doing the workshop as well?